The receipt she folded into a swan. The swan sat on our kitchen counter like it had opinions. It was the kind of napkin origami waiters make to justify a service charge, except it wasn't a napkin, and no waiter had been in our apartment that night. It was a till receipt, thin, glossy, numbers marching up the belly, folded into a neat bird with a long neck and a head tilted as if judging the room. I almost laughed, because who folds a receipt into a swan and leaves it by the kettle? Then I turned it over and saw the restaurant name printed in miniature across the wing. The Chapel, Riverside. 2 entrees, a bottle priced like confidence, and a time stamp I could hear. 22:31. Joe folds things when she's nervous. Metro maps become cranes, flyers become boats, notes become something with wings. She'd been nervous the last 2 weeks without calling it that. New perfume with pepper in it. Late runs that smelled like cabs instead of air. Freelancer hours, she'd said, and it was technically true. She manages clients who like their deadlines like they like their whiskey. Late, and then suddenly. I straightened the swan like an archaeologist and read the line item that mattered least and then most. 2 glasses of ice water, 2 desserts, one with a spoon, one with a fork. I pictured her pretending to share the spoon and hatting herself for not pretending better. When she came out from the shower, towel turbaned, she saw me holding the bird and smiled with the wrong part of her mouth. Got bored while the water heated, she said before I asked. You know how I get. What was the show? I asked and watched her blink. The show. At the chapel, I said lightly. You were near the river. Her eyes did that thing I know well, browsing options. She picked a shelf labeled simple. Maya dragged me. She had tickets. It was loud. I'm old. Maya had the fork or the spoon? I asked, not smiling. She dropped the towel and wrapped dislike around her shoulders. Why are we doing cross-examination before coffee? Because the swan is better at lying than you are, I said, and now we were there, the cold room with good acoustics. I didn't want to be here yet. I wanted to be on the sofa with the idiot show we pretend isn't our favorite. I wanted to fix a hinge and call it a day. She held out her hand for the swan. I gave it to her. She unfolded it like a confession. I'll make coffee, she said. Make words, I said. She looked smaller than she is. Jo is not small. She's made of angles you don't notice are kind until you see them hold something up. She smoothed the receipt and said, his name is Conrad. We met 3 years ago when I pitched the street festival mock-up. He was a sponsor with a jawline and a wallet and a sense of humor he believes is rarer than it is. He was solid in my inbox for a month, and then he was. Last month he wasn't again. Did he look different? I asked, and hated the part of me that wanted to know if time had been kind to him. He looked like time had let him borrow cologne, she said. We ran into each other at the florist near the bridge. He said something stupid about peonies and beginnings. I laughed the laugh I save for when I'm pretending I'm not dangerous. And the chapel. A test, she said. Of what I still want, of what I don't, of whether I can sit across from a man and not audition for a life I'd hate to live in. How'd you score? I asked. She folded the swan back to its first crease. Bad at the beginning, she said. Better by dessert. I poured coffee because hands should have something to do when rooms shift. Did you kiss him? I asked, because not asking makes the brain do crueler math. No, she said, then not last night. There it was, the mouth that speaks quickly finally slowed. I put my cup down. When? Years ago, she said. We were almost a story that got bored with itself. I cut it before it could make a mess that would force me to be the villain. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to be congratulated for being decent. The point is I'm not a statue. I didn't want to talk about statues before breakfast. I wanted toast. I wanted to not know his name. I wanted to be the kind of man who believes receipts are just paper. And now, I asked. Now he thinks he could be the door, she said. I wanted to see if the hallway was as interesting as he says. It is. But the idea of walking makes you feel like the floor is alive, I said, finishing a sentence I wished I didn't understand. She came closer and set her palm on my chest the way a person checks that a machine is still running. Heat did what it always does with us, arrived without asking permission. Her towel fell an inch and the hollow at the base of her throat looked like a small letter. I have read that letter for years. I can recite it. She felt my breathing change and something in her face shifted, relief, then something harder to forgive, hope. I don't want him, she said. I want proof that I can want anything without asking your permission or my own. What do you want right now? I asked, because if I don't ask that exact question, the other ones will line up with knives. I want to climb you like stairs, she said, harsh and honest. And I want you to let me because I'm your wife, not because you're trying to win. So I let her, and I did not think about swans or peonies or the chapel. I thought about her skin cooling where the towel had been, about the way her fingers know the back of my neck, about the sound she makes when relief and heat arrive in the same breath. We moved carefully because we had to. We moved like yes specifically here. It wasn't a fix. It was a fact. When she trembled, I kept my eyes open. So later I would remember that her pupils widen when she stops apologizing for pleasure, and that the freckle near her hip is a map to the stubborn part of me that will always choose her. We stopped before the part where urgency starts making promises it can't keep. We sat at the table with coffee and a swan that had been a receipt, and then a bird, and then evidence, and now, maybe, a toy. I don't want to lie, she said. I'm tired of doing it badly. Then don't, I said, but don't make me find birds. I left it, she said. I wanted you to see it before I decided to rewrite the night into something easier. I went to work with the swan in my pocket. I build exhibits for a small science museum, the kind that makes kids believe magnets are mood swings and mirrors have secrets. My job is to make rules feel like magic. All day I arranged systems that behaved and then failed privately at my own. At lunch I walked to the river. The chapel is one of those places the city gives old buildings when it wants to forgive itself. Stone, a good sign, candles that think they're necessary. I could have walked in and asked if the couple at table 3 looked like an affair. I could have asked if a man with borrowed cologne tipped generously. Instead, I stood by the water and watched a tourist boat pretend to narrate the city and a kid drop a stick and call it a ship. Then I called Conrad. "You must be Mark," he said when I said my name. He had the voice of a man who doesn't need to speak loudly to be heard, which is useful if you intend to be tiresome. "Meet me," I said. "Not the chapel, the cafe by the florist, half an hour." He arrived in 20 minutes and bought his own coffee, which I respected because generosity can be a kind of theft when the math is this. He sat and folded himself into the chair like a paragraph that knows it's well written. "I wanted to see you," he said, "before I decided how much of a coward I want to be." "What did she tell you?" I asked. "That she wanted to remember a version of herself who doesn't narrate before she acts," he said. "That she loves you. That she hates the way love makes her good at schedules." "You think you can make a mess that looks like freedom," I said. "I think I can make a room where she's less efficient," he said, "and then I can leave it clean." I laughed because so much elegance deserves a bruise. "You don't get to write your own epilogue into my house," I said. "If she chooses you, be brave enough to accept the ugly part of that. But don't audition for a role you'll ask me to thank you for not taking." He looked down at his coffee. He had nice hands, and I decided I would resent them until I died. "Do you want me to disappear?" he asked. "I want you to stop acting like weather," I said. "You're a man, be one." He nodded like I'd tipped well. "She asked me not to text," he said. "I won't. If she writes, I'll answer once with the truth, then not again." He stood. "I hope you don't ruin it by being noble, be interesting." "Go to hell," I said, because sometimes precision isn't polite. That evening, Joe stood on our little balcony and watched the neighborhood pretend it was a village. She didn't turn when I came out. She knows how to make a stage direction an invitation. I leaned on the rail next to her and joined the pretending. "He thinks he's useful," I said. "He's useful like thunderstorms are useful," she said. "They remind you electricity exists, and then you have to clean up the yard." "Do you want to be struck?" I asked. "I want to stand in the doorway and feel the air change," she said. "And then I want to shut the door because you're making pasta and the house smells like garlic and us." "Good," I said, "because I made too much pasta." We ate on the sofa. We watched the idiot show. She laughed in 3 places she usually doesn't. I loved her in all 3. At midnight, she brought me to bed by my belt like a woman who believes in gravity and in choice. Heat came easy. We were careful again and then not. This time we crossed the line because lines aren't laws, they're tools. She pressed her mouth to my throat and said the word yes in 3 different ways, and I remembered that I am not a building, I am not a map. I am a person whose hands know this person better than anyone else alive. It wasn't cinematic. It was specific. And that is sometimes the only miracle worth keeping. In the morning, I woke to the smell of bread and saw that she'd made the swan again, badly on purpose, an inside joke for our counter. She'd written on the wing in pen, "Parade, 7 p.m." Parade is the bar where we first made the kind of eye contact that makes bartenders human. I went to work lightheaded and petty and in love and afraid. At Parade, she slid into the booth across from me like the room had been expecting her. "Rule," she said. "Truth before logistics. And if I want thunder, I say thunder, not Maya had tickets." "Rule," I said. "If I need quiet, I say quiet, not is that a new perfume." We drank one too many and walked home like people who weren't married and should have been. At the door, she stopped me with a hand to my chest. "Ask me anything," she said. "Will you write to him again?" I asked. "If I do, I'll tell you first," she said, "and I'll show you the draft." "Will you hate me if I say no?" "I'll hate that we're human," she said. "Then I'll love it again." We went inside and did the thing people do when they don't know how to talk longer than a body can stand still. It was better than last night because it was worse. We let awkwardness in like a guest who will drink too much and then wash all the glasses. We found new sounds. She said please once, a word she hates, and I said more, a word I never use, and then we were quiet and together and the bed remembered us. Conrad didn't text. Weeks went by and our house learned our new language. Sometimes Joe stood at the open window and said thunder, and we laughed and left the lights on. Sometimes I put my hand on her back in the kitchen and said quiet, and she turned the tap off and leaned on the counter and let the room hear us breathe. Sometimes we folded receipts into terrible birds and set them on friends' tables like a curse we'd survived. Once, months later, I saw Conrad on the bridge. He was walking with a woman who had the kind of smile you don't waste on men like him unless you mean to. We nodded at each other like actors who played the same role in different productions. I went home and cut garlic and cried a little for reasons unrelated to onions. There's still a swan on our bookshelf, yellowing into artifact. The numbers on its belly are almost unreadable now. The wing still says parade. Sometimes when I dust it, I think about how small a paper bird is, how easily it burns, how quickly it folds into something else if you learn the crease by heart. Then I put it back and I go find Jo, and I ask her what she wants to be tonight. Thunder or quiet or both, and she tells me, and I try, and we fail, and we laugh, and we try again. We didn't become better people. We became truer ones, less elegant, more precise. We still pay bills. We still forget to buy limes. We still argue about whether the laundry should be a system or a mood. We still choose each other with hands and mouths and sentences and the occasional ridiculous origami. And when the room needs a title, we give it one together and then attempt to live up to it, knowing the paper will wrinkle, the ink will run, and the bird will still somehow fly.